Hello and welcome to episode 11 of On the Cube Leadership Podcast. I'm Craig O'Sullivan and we're joined, as always, with the business pastor, Dr. Rod St. Hill. How are you doing today, Dr. Rod?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Craig. It's good to be with you again.
It's great to be able to be a part of the conversation with you, Dr. Rod, and it's such an honor to be able to have you each week sharing your wisdom, where we take things that are happening in pop culture, in the political realm, in the business world, ministry, and the Bible to learn how we can be better leaders. Now, obviously, we always say this, but we're not political commentators. We're not experts on these topics that we're talking about. We just kind of see things that in our days of watching the news or scrolling through social media or something. And so it may pop out to us and we'll get an idea of how we can actually use that as a good metaphor for our leadership. And so today's theme, we don't always have a theme, but this week we've got yet another theme. And the theme is the bigger picture. Keeping an eye on the bigger picture. We as leaders, it's really, really important for us to make sure we keep our eye on the bigger picture. Make sure we know what the bigger picture is. And a number of our stories today actually use that perfect example of leaders that are keeping an eye on the bigger picture and maybe some that aren't so much looking at the bigger picture. But let me get into the first one where we talk about pop culture, and we're going to talk about a gentleman called Mr. Beast. That's right, Mr. Beast. I don't know if you've seen him, but he is the largest person on YouTube. Now, not largest as in physically, but largest as in number of subs and number of views that he gets for all of his videos. I actually have a list here of stats so that you can get to know who Mr. Beast is on YouTube. Here's a couple of stats. He started his YouTube channel in 2012 at the age of 13. Now, in a recent interview, this is actually what sparked this. He's been interviewed a couple of different times by a couple of big podcasters, but one was Joe Rogan on the Joe Rogan Experience. And it was a great interview, a great insight into what is actually quite a gentleman that seems to have a lot of integrity, right? And seems to be looking at the bigger picture. And he shares that when he first got into YouTube, he pretended that he told his mum that he was going to college and he wasn't attending college at all. He was sitting in his car, editing videos, and chatting with a couple of his friends. And they were all, this is early days of YouTube, and all just trying to figure out how to make it big on YouTube, studying into so much depth about thumbnails and topics and attention rates and things like that. And it's an incredible, go and check it out. I'll put the link below. You have to see the interview with Joe Rogan. It's a great interview, but he started at the age of 13 on YouTube. One of his videos that kind of made him famous was he counted to 100,000. Yep, just counted to 100,000 on a YouTube video. He spends $48 million a year making videos. Yep, $48 million a year. Spends $10,000 per YouTube thumbnail. That's how much importance he puts into thumbnail. $10,000 per thumbnail. Look, the great thing about him, like I said, bigger picture, he doesn't just focus on his wealth. He's raised more than $20 million to plant trees around the world, raised $30 million to remove sea trash. He spent $3.5 million. And actually in the interview, he actually shares that by the end of it, it actually cost almost, $8, $9, almost $10 million to finish off the video, where he did a YouTube remake of the Squid Games. And that's probably what you would have heard him to be famous for. Squid Games, that Netflix series that went gangbusters last year. And He's the first content creator to be featured on the cover of Rolling Stone. He's launched Mr. Beast Burger, as well as he's released a chocolate bar as well. And in 2021, he earned $54 million. That's right. And he's only a young fella. Yeah, us old blokes can say that. He's only young. He has over 200 million subscribers across all of his channels on YouTube. Now, Dr. Rod, to say all of that, I mentioned a little bit, but the one thing that really, really, really jumped out at me about Mr. Beast, his integrity, and he seems like such a very switched on and very focused person. But during this interview with Joe Rogan, he actually talks about how he spends everything he earns on the video to make the next video. He either gives the money away. He's bought an island and given it away. His most recent video was he bought a private jet and everyone put their hand on it, and the last person to take their hand off won the jet. He gave away $1 million. He's given away, like, all his videos are this big thing. And he spoke about how look, he could keep some of that money himself, but his response was so focused on the bigger picture. They said, no, my aim is to build the channel as big as it can. He goes, I want to become the biggest creator ever. He already is, but he says he wants to be bigger. And so he's so focused on investing, not buying new cars, not buying things and stuff like that. And he's just said, I'm focused on the big picture. So every bit of money he gets, he invests straight back into his creating his videos. What can we learn from someone like that, Dr. Rod, as leaders?
Well, the first thing I would say is, until you introduced me to him, I didn't know who Mr. Beast was. So I had to do a little bit of research. But it seems to me as if, one thing for sure and certain is he enjoys life.
Yes, that's
and
good.
I think that's important for all leaders. Make sure you enjoy life and that you don't become so focused on your tasks that it robs you of the joy of simply living. Mm-hmm. The second thing I would say is that he doesn't seem to be as oriented towards making a profit as some people in business might be, and enjoys giving things away, which is great. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that creates a lot of fun and entertainment for many people as well, because I know a lot of his videos are watched long after they've been live on YouTube. So the thought that ran through my mind as I read about him was, well, good on you for having some fun. And he's only young. Mm-hmm. He's about a third of my age, I calculated. And he's at an age when he should be having a bit of fun.
Yeah.
And it's good to see that he's not really caught up in the whole idea of having to make a profit out of everything that he does. Now, clearly, he has a vision which is a bit different to the vision of many entrepreneurs, because it's not defined in terms of profitability or in terms of money overall. He wants to be the biggest content provider on YouTube, which is not necessarily a monetary objective. And I think that's an important thing for us too, as leaders in business, is to know for sure and certain just exactly what our own mission is all about.
Yes. Yeah. Knowing our purpose. We have to know our purpose and know what we're driving towards. It makes it easy for us to make decisions then. Like, he's questioned, why would you spend $1 million making a video? Because he knows his mission. He wants to make the best videos possible. He wants to have the most impact through his videos. So why wouldn't you spend all of your money on that? Look, he said that he did have a silly stage where he earned, where he did buy himself some things, a TV and some toys and everything like that. And he said his house got broken into and all the things got stolen. And he just turned around and he goes, I didn't care. And then I realized the stuff doesn't matter. The stuff can come, the stuff can go, as the Bible says, it rusts away, it gets eaten by moths, and, it all disappears. The things of this world disappear, except for purpose doesn't. When you're actually focused on your purpose and know what your purpose is and so pursuing that, it's easy to make your business drive. Now, it's not just, he does reveal, it's not just about being the biggest content creator. He knows he's building a brand, and he knows that he's building something valuable. His Mr. Beast burgers, he's created a fast food kind of, let's say chain that now is releasing these Mr. Beast burgers. He's released the Mr. Beast chocolate bar, and he's doing all of these things that he knows that because he invests so much into doing the thing that he's good at, that it's actually grow. You said he's not focused on profits. Well, actually, he's maximizing the profit of the brand, and the brand itself has value, right? Apparently, he was offered $10 billion for his business, and he turned it down. He's like, and when he was asked why, he's like, well, I know it's going to be worth so much more than that. And he turned around and he said, well, what would I do? Like, I would stop and do what? That's because he's not focused on the money. He's focused on the long-term vision, on his purpose of building the creation, building the brand, keep creating the next biggest viral video. That's what drives him. And so we as leaders, we have to know what our purpose is. We have to know so that we can stay fixated, because, you hear these stories of during his interviews of him, of him as a young kid. So, at college, knew he wanted to be a YouTuber and spent countless hours researching. You should hear him go into it. He just nerds out, and I kind of nerded out with him. I loved it. He's talking about, the attention and about, click through and really, really researched. And they got thousands and thousands of videos and compared them. Which one had more attention? Which thumbnails? He looked at the opacity of thumbnails and the colors, and he's like, this one tends to get he just went deep into it. So a few things we can learn from Mr. Beast as leaders is, number one, if you want to be the best possible leader, you need to invest the time to do it. You need to actually do the research, get to know your leadership, but also get to know your industry, get to know what works, what doesn't work, understand the depth of it, and also stay true to your purpose. Now, Dr. Rod, you know where this is going. I am going to give a bit of a shameless plug to our leadership program, link down below, because you guys know, if you haven't heard us talk about it before, our free leadership development program, we actually start and spend the first 10 weeks of the program focusing on helping you discover what your purpose is, because we actually believe that that's so crucial and so key for you becoming the best possible leader you can. And as someone like Mr. Beast shows, when you're so focused on your purpose, that's how you reach success. Dr. Rod, was there anything else that you learned from this young whippersnapper about as you were doing this research?
Well, you're never too young to be entrepreneurial either.
Yeah, that's good.
And as you said, he started at 13 years of age. And I can remember doing a seminar for a church in Victoria a little while ago. And there was a farming family there. Mm-hmm. And they had a son. He was only, I think he was 8 years of age. But, he'd already started up a firewood business.
Wow.
And, of course, in the country, lots and lots of people have open fireplaces where they're still legal. So he was busy chopping wood, and his dad was helping him deliver it. And I said to his father, you nurture that, because he's actually shown the spark of entrepreneurship. Yeah. And, a lot of kids get pretty keen on, the good old lemonade stand or something like that. Look, if you see your children engaging in those kinds of activities, do everything you can to nurture that entrepreneurial gift in them. If they've got it, it won't really flourish in them unless it is actually encouraged and nurtured. So, I mean, it's a good thing that his mum, Mr. Beast's mum, didn't rouse on him for telling lies. Maybe she did. But she didn't shut him down.
Yeah.
She didn't shut him down. And that's a good thing. So be sensitive to the signs in your own children, maybe your spouse, people around you, to see whether or not there is evidence that they're entrepreneurial. Because we don't teach people to be entrepreneurs. That's not what the education system is all about. It's not teaching people to take risks, and entrepreneurship is all about taking a measured risk, a calculated risk. So, it mixes risk-taking and prudence, of course. But I think there's a good lesson there. And, age ought not to be a barrier to successful entrepreneurship.
Yeah, that's really good. And when we talk about leadership, I truly believe that the parenting is one of the greatest leadership challenges and opportunities for us as leaders, is to raise up the next generation. Nurture that, because no, his mum actually wasn't very encouraging. She didn't appreciate it. He ended up, as soon as he could move out, he moved out so that he was free to be able to do this silly little thing, YouTube, and now he makes tens of millions of dollars per year, and is the biggest YouTuber or content creator on the planet. And maybe there are some. Let's not now. It's actually probably not a bad point for us to maybe delve a little bit deeper on Dr. Rod, without spending too much time on it. How do we find that balance while parenting? I'm a young parent. A parent of a young child, and I don't know how do you find that balance between still being responsible yet supporting your children to explore? For example, he didn't go to college because he was dedicating all of his time to this YouTube thing. Now, back then, YouTube was not a thing. Now, obviously, unfortunately, when you ask, many years ago, what do people want to be? Kids wanted to be a movie star or a rock star or a pop singer or something like that. Nowadays, most kids you ask, what do they want to be? They want to be an influencer. And it's just this new era. But how do we manage our children through that, encourage them to explore, but still not prevent them from throwing their life away chasing something that isn't actually them?
Well, one thing, and look, I'm not really an expert on parenting, not for one moment would I consider myself such, but I think one very significant thing in the way in which he behaved as a child was that he did some pretty serious research.
Yeah.
So for him, it wasn't just a dream.
Yeah.
And, often our kids come to us with a dream.
Yes.
And dreams are good, but dreams get nobody anywhere unless people are prepared to do the very hard work of turning the dream or the visual into a reality.
Yep.
And that hard work will often involve doing some research. So the fact that he spent a lot of time, maybe some people would argue too much time, researching YouTube, I think that is a pretty decent indicator that there's something more than merely wishful thinking or a dream. We all have dreams. Most people never fulfill their dreams because they just remain a dream. And people don't build a strategy. They don't do the research in order to bring that dream from, if you like, a state of wishful thinking into a state of actual being. So I think one really important sign is when you're observing your child's behavior, are they really just wishing this might be the kind of future that they experience, or are they actually really putting effort into realizing that dream now? And I think the more evidence that you see that they're really putting a lot of effort into it now, the more confident you can be that this is actually a gift that you should nurture.
That's really good. So what can we learn as leaders from Mr. Beast? Number one, let's see the bigger picture. Keep your eye focused on your purpose. Know what your purpose is and invest, throw everything into that. Spend time researching, spend time investing, focus on the outcome that you know your purpose is driving towards. Keep that focus, research, invest your time, develop your skills, know everything there is about that end. As a little side note, nurture the next generation. If you can see potential in them, encourage them, support them, show them how they can research, show them how they can discover the information rather than just wishing to be that. Dr. Rod, thank you. That was actually quite incredible. So let's move on to our next topic, politics. We did actually take a bit of a pause in the recording of this video because our next topic was actually talking about political people being able to see the bigger picture and be able to make decisions for the bigger picture. And we actually had planned to discuss how Trump, we mentioned, last week, how Trump, announced his announcement and kind of disrupted things. That was actually in our midterm ones, which was recorded last week, but we've thrown it ahead. So this is now going to be a few weeks later. But, talking about, that announcement and now looking forward, there was a lot of articles. There was actually one particular article that sort of showed that obviously Governor DeSantis, after his win in Florida, he's been a strong possibility for 2024 as president. And there was an article in Politico that was saying that DeSantis is now 26 points ahead in Florida and 20 points ahead in Georgia, as opposed to he only led by 7% and 6%, respectively. And it's really interesting that in the article goes on about, well, if Trump announces it's going to ruin and they should just back DeSantis because he's going to be the most popular one, so why don't they just support? Now, we stopped filming because it was literally at the point where we're about to talk about politics that Trump started his announcement. And we stopped, we listened to it, and I have to say that my comments on this from a leadership perspective have shifted slightly, Dr. Rod, because at first I was going to say, well, shouldn't Trump just step aside? Because obviously DeSantis seems to be the stronger candidate. Obviously, there's a lot of hate around Trump. There's a lot of decisive division around him, and obviously a lot of controversy and everything like that. Yes, if he really wants the best for America and best for the Republicans, couldn't he get behind DeSantis rather than fighting him, considering he seems to be at the front, rather than trying to pull him down and this become a fight between them? That was my original thought. Now, after hearing that speech, that has to be one of the best speeches I've ever heard him deliver. It was collected. It was focused. It was actually focused on the bigger picture. It was very inclusive. He wasn't doing his typical there was a bit of Trump sprinkled in there, obviously, but there just wasn't the rhetoric that there normally is. And it almost gave me hope. But it's like his speech seemed to be focused on the bigger picture. What's your take on being, obviously he has a vision for America. There's another strong candidate who's technically on the same team. how do we as a leader know when to kind of charge forward and when to champion others?
That's a really good question. And I think in the case of President Trump, a lot of it has to do with his personality. And, we've talked on a couple of occasions before about him, and I've said a couple of times, of course, that I think he lacks wisdom. And certainly that was the case when he intervened when he contributed to the runoff elections in Georgia after the 2020 elections. And I think probably that's what cost probably 2 seats in the Senate. So I'm a little bit ambivalent, but like you, as I listened to his speech, I thought this is probably, if not the most statesman-like speech he's presented, it would have to go very close.
Yeah.
Now, if he was able to maintain that kind of presence, then he would probably win over a lot of voters.
Yeah.
And might, in that case, be a good choice. But if he kind of reverts to the highly self-focused, accusatory kind of person that he seems to have become following the election in 2020, then I just don't think that's going to serve the purposes of anybody particularly well. But certainly listening to that speech, it was in many ways quite inspiring.
Yeah.
Now, how do we know? It's this whole, remember the song about the gambler?
Yes.
You got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them.
Uh-huh.
That requires a lot of wisdom.
Yeah.
And obviously we're going to see a range of responses to the announcement that President Trump is going to seek re-election.
And
as I
obviously
understand
this is recorded, like this probably won't go out for maybe another 3 to 4 weeks. So there'll be a lot that's happened in between now. So
there'll be a lot of commentary.
Don't shoot us. Don't shoot us. Right. But this is our take. Let's say it's right literally in the minute of when he's shared this. But yes, keep going, Dr. Rod.
So look, I do think that there's going to be a wide range of responses. I do think that that the left, I'm not talking necessarily about the whole of the Democratic Party, but the left will fight very hard because he's clearly going to come after them.
Yeah.
And there'll be many people who will applaud that. The other thing too is that if he does go for re-election and if he is successful, my understanding is that he can only serve another 4 years.
Oh, really?
So he can't do 2 terms because he's already served 1 term. I'm fairly certain that's the case under the current arrangements in the Constitution. So 1 or 2 commentators have said, well, yeah, he could run, he could win, do 4 years, and then there would be an opportunity for somebody like Ron DeSantis or Brian Kemp to step up to the plate for 8 years. And 12 years sounds pretty good.
Yes.
If you're a member of the GOP, of course.
Yeah.
But, to answer that question, when do we know? It does require a lot of wisdom. And look, I'm not convinced by what I heard that Donald Trump has necessarily kind of moved himself out of the center of things. We need to see a lot more evidence of that.
Yeah.
But one particular option the party could take is to say, all right, we don't want to have a bad fight.
Mm-hmm.
So let's put our weight behind him and do everything we possibly can to win both houses in Congress and the presidency in 2024. And let's just put aside, now that he's made the announcement, we know that if anybody opposes him, that it's going to be pretty nasty. And of course, that happens on both sides of politics in the United States almost every time we come up. Usually at the end of the 8-year period, there's usually quite a lot of infighting within the parties to determine the final candidate. So yeah, there's a lot going on. There'll be a lot that goes on. I if I hadn't heard the speech, as much of the speech as I heard, I would probably stick to the advice that I preferred a few weeks ago, which is he should back right out, and allow someone like Ron DeSantis or Brian Kemp, or there are other stars as well. The party is reasonably well placed because there was some pretty significant swings in important counties in the House of Representatives elections. There are quite a few Republicans who came pretty close to toppling incumbent Democratic governors as well. So even though they haven't got control of the House, it looks almost certain now that they will have a slim majority in the House of Representatives, which is much better than some people were predicting just a short time ago.
Yeah.
I think the party is fairly well poised, fairly well situated at the moment to do pretty well in 2024. So I'm not sure that a big internal battle over who should be the candidate for presidency is something that the party should countenance. But, you know, we live in really interesting times. It's very difficult to answer your question. If I was Donald Trump, I'd probably still decide to gracefully withdraw, because there are certainly good quality candidates that the party could win with in 2024. Having said that, though, if he's determined to throw his hat in the ring, I don't know that the party is going to benefit a lot from a whole lot of internal blood spilling on the way.
Like
but one thing I think is for sure and certain. Pardon?
Like one thing that we've spoken about before is about a house divided can't.
That's right.
A house divided against itself can't stand. Yeah.
But look, one thing that I think is for sure and certain is that there's going to be really, shall we say, energetic opposition from the left.
Yeah.
And we need to watch that pretty closely because that could do a lot of damage to America, not only to their economy, but to their society as well.
So let's pull this back to leadership, right? Rather than politics, because, you know, we can share a little bit of politics, but let's pull it back to us as leaders, as most of us wouldn't be in politics as leaders, but in our homes, in our communities, in our ministries, there are times where there are other leaders that we should step aside for. How do we find that time that we should step aside and let a leader grow, you know, releasing them into that, you know, us stepping aside? Because obviously keeping the bigger picture in mind, which is our theme for today, keeping that bigger picture in mind, sometimes someone is more beneficial to carry the mantle. Now, that being said, if the party does go, okay, we got to back Trump, then someone like DeSantis, obviously the wiser thing for him, like as much as he'd want to fight and challenge Trump, obviously the best thing for the party, for the organization, whatever we're leading, is for him to support and to be able to champion and then to be able to support that to go through for 2024 and then hopefully pass on the baton in 2028 as you mentioned. But how do we as leaders know? Because I mean, from both sides, right? Because there's a lot of young leaders that are serving under a senior leader that they themselves consider, I should be in that position and I should be leading this instead of this person. They've had their day, they've had their term. Poor leadership, we speak about, you know, obviously our mission is to eradicate poor leadership. And there'll be lots of people watching today that are sitting under poor leadership and would consider taking them out first. You obviously, Donald Trump like you say, President Trump displays poor leadership at times. And obviously Governor DeSantis would have reason to challenge and consider that he could do a better job. Let's first talk about the younger leaders that want to kind of push the other leader out of the way. How do we approach that?
Well, look, again, this is really, really difficult. For my part, you can't really do it without prayer. You need to have God's guidance. That's probably the number one thing. And honestly, in my own experience, it's always been through a process of prayer that I've actually come to the conclusion that now is the time to step aside. So, yeah, look, prayer is absolutely key here. If you're a Christian and a leader, you need to communicate with God. And I mean all the time. You just got to check in with God, just like Adam and Eve did at the end of every day. In the cool of the evening, they checked in with God as he walked through the garden. We got to do that, check in every day. The second thing would be to seek the wisdom of people we trust, whom we know love us.
Yes.
Who can, in a sense, provide some wisdom sort of outside of our own responsibility through prayer. Because we don't always hear God correctly because our own finiteness sort of kind of intervenes. So we need also to seek the wisdom and the guidance of others. Now, they may not necessarily be older people. Often they will be, but not necessarily. The other thing is to look for signs. A leader has followers, and you can lead without having a leadership position. So without having a formal title or without having a formal management role as a CEO or deputy CEO or chief something or other, have a look. If you've got followers, that'll be a good sign as to whether or not you could be getting pretty close to the time when you should take on leadership. I agree with you, Craig. There are a lot of people in leadership, often who have pioneered a business or a ministry, who have stayed on for too long. Mm-hmm. The pioneers are often a little bit insensitive to the signs that it actually is time to transition to the next generation of leaders. Hopefully, they will also be praying and seeking wise counsel, but too often, poor leadership arises when the pioneer really doesn't have the giftings to take an organisation on to that next level. Because pioneers, they have certain skills, certain giftings which are necessary to get a business or a ministry off the ground, but they don't necessarily have the right set of giftings and skills and experience and qualifications and so on to consolidate and take the organisation through to the next level.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say to young leaders is try as hard as you can not to fall prey to frustration, because the poor leadership isn't your fault.
Yeah.
And I can remember I got a good lesson here where I became, actually depressed because I was in a situation where I was essentially the 2IC to a poor leader. I got really frustrated because I could see what was wrong and I could give advice here and there and it just wasn't being taken. And there was some doctrinal differences that influenced the way in which the leadership was being exercised as well. But in prayer, I came to understand through the Holy Spirit that God had given me the gift to see what was wrong and to know what the solutions were. However, he didn't hold me responsible for all the problems. And that relieved me greatly. Yep. To know that, I can see the problems. I do know what the solutions are, but I'm not responsible. And that just took a great weight from me.
Yep.
And incidentally, when the leadership position did become available and I applied, I didn't get it. Long story there. And funnily enough, the next time that position I should go back. The first time that position became available, I really prayed and God said, you go for it, put everything into it. I took leave from work for a couple of days to write all the responses to the application requirements. I didn't get the job. And the next time it came up, again, I prayed about it, and God said, don't apply. But he said, you just make sure you're here for the transition to the new leadership. So, I've learned in life, you hear and obey. And even if God tells you something you're not too sure about, do it anyway. And it wasn't long after that I moved on to another organisation where I was the CEO and where I was able to apply the skills and the learnings that I had had. So try to avoid being frustrated. Know that although you might see the problems and you might have the solutions, you're not responsible for them.
Yeah.
And just do the best you can to hear from God. And incidentally, that first time I was unsuccessful because I complained to God about it, as you might expect. And he just said, well, I didn't tell you you're going to get the job.
Yeah, I told you to apply. I didn't tell you you were going to get it.
And it was very interesting because the new guy who came in, he was really surprised. And he walked into my office one day and he said, aren't you upset that you didn't get the job? I said, no, you're a good CEO. I want to see good leadership around here, and we've got good leadership. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And I was.
That's good. Hey, so back on a couple of your points, I think that for me, one thing that I've really learned is actually, first thing I do want to say is sometimes it is really tempting for us to try to rebel, right? And unfortunately, this is too many, and obviously in ministry, we see this a lot, but you see it in business and you see it in politics and you see it in other areas that there is a fraction because they didn't agree with what the leader was. They felt like it was their turn to lead and they didn't have the opportunity to lead. So they go and start their own home church, or they go and start their own business, and they become competitors and everything like that. And I've seen way too many people hurt, way too many people not in relationship with Christ because of splits. I've seen way too many people go out and start a business out of rebellion because they think that they can run it better, and they're now stressed and crazy because it wasn't their calling, right? And I think that one thing for us to remember is if we can find a way to stand on the shoulders of the people that have gone before us rather than go and try to build our own tower, we will all be so much better off. Even if that person you're following seems to be displaying poor leadership, they have to be a good leader in some way. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been following them in the first place. They have built something. They have pioneered something. They have, the finances. They have the charisma, they have whatever it is, there's a reason why you're following them in the first place. Remember that. Hold on to the reason why they're a great leader and try to forgive them of their poor leadership. Because what I actually notice is one of the main causes for poor leadership is, on the theme of today, the bigger picture, they don't see their bigger picture. They're unaware of what their purpose is, like Dr. Rod shared. They may be a pioneer and they've gone and pioneered something and now they're stuck there. But pioneers are meant to pioneer and move on. But unfortunately, people pioneer and then they set up camp. And that's where things go wrong. In church terms, some people are evangelists. They attract lots of people and then they plant a church. Maybe they're not meant to be pastoring people. They're meant to be evangelizing because that's their gift. And it's easy for us to talk in ministry terms, but that's the same in business as well. That's the same in politics. It's the same in the arts. We must be focused on our purpose. And if we're following a leader that is displaying poor leadership, maybe that poor leadership is because they are operating outside of their purpose. So maybe what if instead of us going and trying to start our own thing, invest our time, invest our money, pull people and resources away from what was already existing, instead of us doing that, What if we supported that leader who is a good leader because you're following them in the first place, but forgiving them for their poor leadership and encouraging them, maybe even releasing them into their purpose so they can focus on their purpose? You know what? Let's bring it back to the topic for today. Trump, President Trump. What if President Trump's role is not actually to run? What if his role is to evangelize? What if his role is to rally the troops? What if his role is to kind of, he says he's this great negotiator and he can make all these deals. What if he was just an advisor to someone like Governor DeSantis or something like that and was able to go out and do all these deals that he's meant to do? What if they were able to come together, both focus on their purposes and what they're gifted and called for? Imagine the power that could be, rather than them fighting, tearing shreds in the GOP, and then all of a sudden the Democrats have this amazing target practice because it's just it's open season because now President Trump and Governor DeSantis are open season on each other, right? That's what can happen with our own leadership, with our own ministries, with the ministries you're a part of or the organizations you're a part of. How about we try to bring ourselves together and try to stand on the shoulders of those that have gone before us, rather than tearing down the building and trying to build something new. Dr. Rod, I know that was a bit of a rant. Any last thoughts on that topic?
Look, I don't really think I can add anything more, except to the person who's been in a leadership position for a long time. Don't forget that one important principle in leadership is to make yourself redundant.
That's
because God isn't going to waste you. He'll take you on to something else. And so always be looking for people in your organization whom you can actually nurture and build up and mentor so that they can actually take over. Life's pretty good when you leave one position and move into another position of leadership. I would just encourage you in that don't be frightened to raise people up, to make you redundant so that you're then released to move on to the next thing that God has for you. That's
really good. And the younger leaders, don't be afraid to learn from the experienced leaders. I've had this conversation a few times actually over the last few weeks in chatting with pastors all over the world, and it's been an interesting topic that's come up about what do I do when it's time to move on, and I'm like you're our wealth of knowledge, like you're not useless anymore. Like you don't have to do the work anymore. You've done the hard yards. You've worked the sweat. You've built, it's your time to rest, but we need your wisdom. We need your wisdom. So stay around, share with us. And younger leaders, appreciate the wealth of knowledge and experience you have sitting right in front of you. So let's transition into our next topic about talking about business leaders and talking about looking at the bigger picture. I recently watched a mini documentary series on Netflix about End One. Dr. Rod, do you remember the brand End One?
No, I don't. I'm sorry to say.
So I'm a basketball fan. I actually played competitive basketball before I had some injuries and that kind of ruined that career prospect. But back when I was at school, End One was the theme. Now, End One is if you go up for a shot, you hit the basket, but you get fouled, it means End One. And you get one more shot, right? That's where it comes from. Now, they kind of burst to the scene in the scenes early to mid 90s. And they were on a mission to try to become the number one sports brand. They tried to take on Nike and failed. They try to take them on again and again and again. They want to be the number one basketball, brand. And obviously, Nike had, the ground. They had the money. They had the athletes. They had the backing. And in this miniseries, and I encourage you, jump in and watch it on Netflix. It's actually quite interesting. If you're into leadership and you want to learn stuff, I love watching these mini documentary series on these businesses that succeed, and Apple. Actually, we'll talk about it another time. But just learn, go and see what they're doing. And what I learned from these is they tried and tried and tried, battle the David and Goliath, and they lost. They kept losing because they were trying to fight on Goliath's battleground. Right? They were trying to battle Nike to be Nike, pretty much. Until they got a revelation, until they realized the bigger picture. What had actually made them popular was their shirts were actually a lot of trash talk. Street basketball is all about trash talk, right? And so they actually became popular because of their T-shirts weren't just normal, just branded T-shirts. They were trash talk. They had all the typical sayings. And the advantage that they had was a big corporation like Nike wouldn't be allowed to put trash talk on their shirts because their investors wouldn't allow it and their board wouldn't allow it. But a young company, a young street ball company could get away with it, and they did. And that's actually what made them popular. And while they were trying to come into the mainstream and they tried to release a shoe, and on the day of their first release, a professional basketball player did a dunk in their shoe, and the shoe exploded. The shoe collapsed. He injured his foot, and I don't want to ruin the story. Spoiler alert. Sorry, I meant to say spoiler alert before. Go and watch it, right? And they were trying to compete on this big stage, and they were about to close up. They lost. And then they realized the big picture. They remembered what their purpose was. Their purpose was trash talk. Their purpose was street ball, not professional basketball. And so what they did is they got some video teams to go, video crew to go out and just film street ball competitions. They put on all these local street ball competitions, put on this mixtape, and just release this, what they call their mixtape in 99. And this thing went viral. Before the internet, this thing went viral. Everyone was watching the tapes. Everyone was sharing the tapes. Everyone was dubbing the tapes. Remember those days of dubbing tapes, Dr. Rob?
I do.
It's taking us back a little bit. But this is what actually then allowed them to take a hold. They realized that they're not pro basketball shoes or pro basketball clothes. They're street ball. I think that it's this beautiful metaphor to show that when we actually keep an eye on the bigger picture, what is our purpose, we can succeed. But when we try to be someone else, that's when we fail. Dr. Rod, you said you hadn't heard much about End One, but what advice do you have for business leaders that are trying to pretend or trying to take on a bigger person in the industry and losing sight of who they are?
Well, you take a bit of a risk, of course, because you don't have pockets that are as deep as theirs. And any company that has the bulk of a market, the biggest share of a market, they will defend their market share. That's just the way they are. And you can anticipate that that's what they're going to do. And, try breaking into the market for cola drinks, for example.
Uh-huh.
You're not going to do it. You may ultimately develop a niche, and there are some niche brands in that market. And I suspect it's the same thing in sportswear as well, and including in the basketball area. And yeah, there are a few brands that have really pretty much got the whole market. So the big picture here is actually to see where you fit. You know, the big picture angle here is to see where you fit in the big picture. Now, the way I read their history, now I haven't actually seen the documentary. I've read about it, and I've basically sort of looked at the contents of the script. It looks to me as if where they went wrong is that their business was built on the basis of serendipity, not strategy.
Yes.
So I didn't see a lot of evidence of strategizing. By serendipity, I mean they had some accidents along the way. Some accidents nearly sunk them, like the explosion of their first shoe.
Yeah.
Their second shoe was a bit more successful, of course. But other serendipitous things were like this discovery of their association with streetball. That really didn't come about because of any strategic thinking. It was more or less serendipitous. It happened by accident. So there didn't seem to me to be very much evidence that they had this big picture view. Here's the big picture. This is where we think we fit. I don't know that they went through that exercise, certainly not in the early days.
Yeah, that's a good insight because they didn't. Obviously, they're not around now. Well, kind of, they're not really around now, and then they're no longer. Let's just say, for argument's sake, they're not around. They're not any competitive force now. That's interesting. Your take on, they discover their purpose by almost chasing this viral thing and kind of. They seem to be following the trend that was happening in front of them rather than being intentional about it. And because they weren't able to intentionally own who they were, where they were going, etc., it's a result of now at the end, like they got some results, but they're kind of nowhere to be seen now.
Well, yeah, and I think part of that is that they weren't strategic in the way in which they went about things. But the other thing too, and I could be wrong about this, and I've been wrong plenty of times in the past, but it seems to me that there may not have been really good communication among the three founders. Tom Austin, of course, moved to Taiwan to be closer to the production side of things. And as I understand it, he was probably the person who was most gifted in terms of product design.
Yeah.
He burnt out. That's pretty clear. He burnt out. And there wasn't the capacity within the organisation to pick up the slack, as it were, that he left. And then, of course, he decided that he wanted out altogether, and that's pretty typical of someone who's burnt out. So it looks to me as if they weren't managing that side of things all that well. And look, if you're in any kind of industry, you need to be asking your partners all the time, are you doing okay?
Yeah.
You know, what's happening? How are you coping with the stresses of the business?
Well, I think
how are things going at home and so on.
That's an important point for us as leaders. We do need to be checking in on our team. We need on their, not just their productivity, but their mental state and their personal life and stuff like that. But that's a good point. We need to care when we're leading people. We need to care for them as a whole person, love them as a person, not just love them for their productivity.
Absolutely. My brother was once production manager in a factory that was producing steel office furniture, cabinets and so on and so forth. And he used to make it a practice to go into his place of employment. And so he wasn't on the floor at all. His office was separated. But he used to go into work deliberately about 20 minutes earlier than he needed to. And he'd just walk right around the shop floor talking to everybody. So he knew the names of all the children of any particular worker. He knew whether a spouse had been sick, all of those things. So he knew something personally about everyone. And every day he'd go around and have a brief chat with, it wasn't a big factory, but he used to go and have a brief chat with all of them, just checking in. How you doing? And most of the time, if there was something that was going wrong, there wasn't really a lot that he could do, but there was a sympathetic ear. And so that's important.
That's
but also leaders need to check in on other leaders as well and say, how are you going? Tell me really and truly, how are you going?
Yeah, that's really good.
And I think that might have been an issue here as well.
Yeah.
Because Tom Austin clearly burnt out, and there doesn't appear to have been any warning. And so when he decided that he wanted to break free, that was a bit of a shock. And there was, of course, no plan in place to transition to a new person or to a new team.
Yeah. Or with warning signs, there would be a lot that you'd be able to manage and prevent that from happening. And I think that, at the start of it, the other founders would kind of like, they just said, like, we didn't really want to start a company. We just wanted to do something that would allow us to play basketball. That's kind of all what they wanted to do. And so there obviously was no intention there. They didn't understand the bigger picture of running an organization. And so they just wanted something to have fun. And back to what we said about the other thing, the previous point about pioneering, then that's okay. They should have known their purpose. Their purpose was pioneering this thing, having a great idea, and then putting in a team that could actually take it strategically and intentionally towards the outcome that it needed to. They could have created so much more rather than reacting to things that are happening and, oh, well, that's a good thing, let's just chase that, or that happened to take off. Yeah, it seemed like everything that they did intentionally, they didn't do many things intentionally, but the things that they did intentionally didn't do well. And the things that happened haphazardly, they were the things that did well. And, there was actually another, talking about looking after people, there was, kind of their downfall was the fact that they didn't really take care of their players on the tours and stuff like that. There was a lot of infighting and contract issues and everything like that. And yeah, it seemed like they never really had sight on the bigger picture, that everything just was a mess. And let's bring it back to us as leaders. If we aren't keeping an eye on the bigger picture, if we are not strategically moving forward towards that bigger picture, if we don't know what our purpose is and we're just reacting to things or whatever, you will see things fall apart. And I encourage you, jump on a Netflix and watch the series, and you will see a lot of examples of poor leadership in there and some inspiration to know that when you know your purpose and when you're actually operating within your purpose, that's where you get results. That's where you can succeed as a leader, as an organization, as a ministry. So let that be an encouragement to you. Talking about being a part of bigger picture, let's transition into talking about ministry leaders. And there was something a few weeks ago that was released. I was fortunate to be able to talk to someone that was pretty close to this a couple of weeks ago, and they shared with me how proud they are of everything that's happening. I want to talk about, let me call it my home. Yes, I'm in the Dominican Republic, but I miss the Gold Coast. I miss the Gold Coast. I miss living on the Gold Coast. It's one of my favorite places on the planet to live. I've been all over the world, and I would say that the Gold Coast is one of my favorite places to live. And I miss the Gold Coast. Obviously, Dr. Rod, you're still on the Gold Coast, so it's great that I still have that connection there. A number of, one of our other board members is also from the Gold Coast as well, so it's great. But the Gold Coast City Council had the NAYBA report, not spelt NAYBA, it's NAYBA report, where they got together and they researched. There's actually quite a bit of research. I'm not going to get into everything about this, and links for everything is below if you want to go and check out the details of it. But I want to kind of capture the headline of it. Gold Coast Christians helped contribute $43 million in social impact to Australia's sixth biggest city last year. So this was a report that they did. They got amongst all the churches and everything like that and looked at all of the contributions the church across the Gold Coast that does to benefits to the community. And what they found is the benefits that the community received was $43 million worth. Not just $43 million worth of money, but of the work, of the charity, of the support, of the soup kitchens and food banks and counselling and the benefit to the community. The church on the Gold Coast, which is Australia's sixth biggest cities, so it's not that big, right? $43 million in social impact. First of all, you're talking about the bigger picture. This is now being a part of something bigger. As soon as I heard this, I thought to myself, pastors on the Gold Coast need to stand up. Pastors on the Gold Coast, and obviously Dr. Rod, you're one of them, and I want to kind of congratulate them. Okay, you don't have the biggest church on the Gold Coast, and sometimes it can be discouraging. And I kind of want to, this is kind of what I want to share to you, Dr. Rod, but also to pastors all over the world. You may not have the biggest ministry, but remember that you're part of something that is bigger than you, that is making an impact, and you are doing your little bit. Your church, your ministry is making that little impact. And so, Dr. Rod, you were a part of $43 million of social impact on the Gold Coast. First of all, thank you. But secondly, how do you feel as a pastor of a church when you see that report?
Well, it makes me, I think, realize perhaps that indeed, the church is bigger than my own little congregation, and it's even bigger than the biggest congregation on the Gold Coast. And we do have some quite large assemblies as well, numbering into the thousands. So churches of all sizes have a contribution to make to our community, to the felt needs of our community. And this report, by the way, wasn't just of Christian churches. It looked at the impact of what we called communities of faith. When I say we, I chair City Impact Limited, which is the kind of official body that commissioned this research. So obviously I've got a bit of an axe to grind here, and it was strongly supported by Gold Coast City Council, and it was supported not just in word. They actually helped fund the whole process as well. So that, in fact, if it wasn't for their very generous support, it may not have happened at all. But the Gold Coast is an interesting place to be in, where we're a young population, in the sense that the vast bulk of the population was not actually born here.
Yep.
So most people who live in the Gold Coast city area, we're migrants from other parts of Australia, or indeed from overseas. Around about 7% of our population are New Zealand born, as a matter of fact. So everywhere you go, you bump into a Kiwi, and there are lots of Kiwis who pastor churches over here. But look, I was one of the churches who filled in the survey. I got the survey. What happened was, the survey was done by the NAYBA organisation, and they do this all over the world. Actually, they're a global organisation, and they've got a particular method that they use, which is quite robust. They identified well over 200 faith-based communities and organisations, and then they were all invited to participate by way of a survey. And I do remember filling in the survey, and and I was able to outline what it was we were doing in terms of serving our community. And for us, it was mainly actually through financial, I wouldn't call it financial counselling, but maybe financial education, educating people how to wisely manage their finances. And there are lots of churches involved in this through the Christians Against Poverty ministry and others that operate not only in Australia, but also in many countries overseas. But as you suggested, there are things like soup kitchens and other kinds of cooperatives that operate. There's a lot of counselling that goes on, assistance for people who suffer from disabilities, assistance for people with mental illness and so on. And so there's a good deal that's happening. And one of the most positive things from this report, from my perspective, was that their response rate was just over 50%.
Yep.
That's a really good response rate to a survey. And it indicates that our faith communities in this area are very strongly engaged. The other thing was I had no idea of the size of that impact.
Yes.
$43 million is, that would be the bottom, the very lowest amount it could be because of the assumptions that were made in the calculations.
Yeah, I heard from...
In all likelihood, the values were a lot higher.
I heard, well, I mean, first of all, like you said, only like 50-odd% actually answered. So this is calculated on half of what could actually happen.
But also very, very low estimates of what the wage equivalent at the time and so on.
And I heard that someone, I won't mention names, but I heard that an economist actually reviewed the report and said this was way conservative. The numbers were very underestimated, and the impact was actually far greater than that.
Oh, it would be. There are a few assumptions in there which are deliberate assumptions to keep all of the estimates conservative, because you don't want a report like this to be criticised on the basis that, look, you've overinflated all the data. So better to err on the side of being conservative. So, yes, the data was based only on the surveys. And one of the major assumptions in there was that the equivalent wages value of the work done by volunteers was actually valued at the minimum legal wage, which is well below the average wage. And so in all likelihood, that $43 million is probably 2 or maybe even 3 times that much. But there's no point in getting into arguments about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The other really interesting result was that over 50% of the population on the Gold Coast availed themselves of one or more of the services provided. And in the compilation of the report, they were very, very careful not to double count.
Yes.
And so these are unique interactions. 57% of the population on the Gold Coast availed themselves of one or other of the services offered by the faith groups. So that's very, very significant. It really does show that governments, for example, can't do it on their own, and individual churches can't do it on their own.
Yeah.
And it really illustrates, I think, the great benefits there are in the Christian churches operating as the Christian church.
Yes.
In order to provide for some of the very pressing needs of our community. Now, of course, evangelization isn't the main reason why this is done. Yeah. It's done as an expression of love for our neighbours. But clearly through these actions, people are actually drawn in to the kingdom of God as well. So there's that benefit, although that is not something which is addressed in this particular report. Yeah. The other thing that I really liked about the report, and of course I am biased, but the other thing I really liked about the report is that it reported a lot of little case studies of people whose lives were positively impacted. And I think that's important as well, because the $43 million is, in a sense, the value of all of the input. Mm-hmm. It's the effect on the lives of the people which is the output.
Yes.
And of course, that's a much, much more difficult thing to measure.
Yeah.
And the little vignettes we see in this report of people who were impacted, I think that does give us a bit of an inkling as to, if you like, the outputs that were the result of this $43 million worth of inputs. And look, I'd encourage other communities to embark on a similar exercise. It's not all that cheap. You do need to find a fair bit, but one of the reasons why it's not cheap is that it is very, very well done. It's very robust.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And look, I know many of the pastors involved. I've been privileged to engage with what is now called the Gold Coast Christian Church Leaders Roundtable. And these pastors are just amazing. And their heart is to bless the people. They want to see people in our city flourish. And I think that's a reflection of the heart of God. And it's quite amazing to sit in meetings where pastors are quite clearly overriding their own assembly's interest, their own little church interest, in order to make it possible for the whole of the Church of the Gold Coast to have a social impact. And then beyond that, of course, an impact for the kingdom. Yeah. I feel it a great privilege to live in this city. And I've only lived here for 12 years, coming on to 13 years. But I've seen in that time this growing unity among the leaders of the Christian church. And that includes ministries that are not necessarily directly associated with, a named church. And there are plenty of those as well. There's been a great shift, I think, in the heart of many people. And many are coming to the realization that, as we say, we're better together.
Better together. And you're seeing the bigger picture, which is obviously the theme of today. And that's what I want to really encourage. Ministry leaders out there, you're not on your own. You are actually a part of something bigger. Now, you may be part of a denomination, you may be an independent, you may be whatever. Just remember, we are the church. We are all part of this. And we are making, this just goes to show. Now, obviously, like we're both a little bit biased because we're both from the Gold Coast. You're a pastor on the Gold Coast. You're well in, part of a lot of the efforts of uniting the churches across the Gold Coast. I believe the Gold Coast are doing a great thing for the churches of bringing that unity, obviously being led by the mayor, Tom Tate. He's very intentional about his Christian faith and trying to bring that together, and has done that in a number of different ways. We won't get into that, but it's quite powerful to be able to see what can happen. Now, there's a long way we've got to go. Right, the churches are still not 100% united, but getting there. And you can see when there's this unity, when there's all this working together, there's this impact. At least $43 million worth of impact in a year, and that is just in a small country town. Gold Coast is just a small country town. Last I remember, the count was 600,000. Or something like that. I think it's
it's a bit less than that, but it's not big.
It's not a big city, and able to have this impact because all the pastors, all the faith groups are able to see bigger than just building their local church. They're focused on building the community, going out and giving love, giving support, being that, the light unto the world that God has actually called us to. So let me encourage you. If you're a pastor feeling a little bit like you're not achieving, or maybe even just a leader in general that you're not achieving, just remember, you are part of something much, much bigger. And we need to keep our eyes focused on the bigger picture. Yes, the purpose that God has called you to your particular congregation for, but also the community. what is it, the bigger picture of how can you be a better contributor to the community. And remember that you're not alone. There are other churches, other ministries out there in your community, and you guys are making an impact together. So maybe even encouragement. Maybe go join arms, link arms with some of your local other denominations. You know, we're in this together. We are the church. We may worship slightly differently, may have slightly different doctrines, but we serve the one God, and he's called us to the one great commission. So let that be an encouragement. Let's transition to talking about the Bible. How we can learn to see the bigger picture in the Bible. And I want to actually turn to Luke, from our leadership lessons from Luke 10:38. I'm going to read this. I like this passage, right? As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all of the preparations that had to be made. Sound familiar? Especially in ministry, we can get caught up in having to do the run sheet, having to prepare the volunteers, having to prepare our message, there's lots of things we can do to get busier. Now, I know that you as a pastor have preached this message before, but I'm speaking to you as well. You too can get caught up in the busyness of ministry. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me." Martha, Martha. Now, actually, I've got to confess, whenever I hear this passage preached, all what I hear is, "Martha, Martha, Martha," you know, from the Brady Bunch. But anyway, I digress. That's all I hear whenever I hear this verse. Martha, Martha, Martha. The Lord answered, because I kind of feel like it was almost said in that tone. You are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. You know, Jesus is talking about, let's be focused on the bigger picture. Let's not get caught up in the busyness of the everyday things. You know, like we've shared today, there's so many different little things that we can get caught up in, and little distracting things. But when we're focused on the bigger picture, that in that moment of spending time with God. Now, as I know, you've preached this verse and heard it preached plenty of times before. We know that Jesus, you know, the meal needed to be prepared. People wouldn't have eaten if not, and things need to be cleaned up and everything like that. But Dr. Rod, let's keep a sight of the bigger picture. What is important?
Are you asking me what is important?
No, I'm saying,
or are you just asking me to agree with you?
Keeping a sight of what is important. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know, one of the lessons I draw from this is that what is important depends. So right at that time, although it was actually important to prepare everything that needed to be prepared to offer hospitality to a friend, Jesus was a friend of Mary and Martha. So he was not just someone sort of breezing through. He was an intimate friend with them. But and it was important, of course, in that culture. Hospitality was everything. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that Martha is not actually condemned for doing what she's doing, because what she was doing was a good thing. She's remonstrated with by Jesus because she just got her priorities wrong at that time.
Yep.
At that time, Mary had her priorities right. Mm-hmm. Mary was at the feet of Jesus, and some versions say like receiving teaching from him.
Yeah.
And I think it was a fairly gentle rebuke that Jesus gave, of course, to Martha, that you know, Mary had chosen the better part or the better thing to be doing at that time. So what is best actually is dependent upon the circumstances. There's not really a hierarchy that says preparation for hospitality is more important than listening to your guest. Sometimes it's more important to listen to your guest. Sometimes it's more important to withdraw from the guest and work on your preparations so that you can provide the very best of hospitality as a sign of your love and affection for that person. But we need to keep in mind at all times the big picture, and then we need to ask ourselves, well, what is the right thing to focus on in the context of the big picture, but also in the context of what is happening right now.
Yeah, that's good. And obviously there's kind of two messages in here. Is obviously us as leaders, we need to make sure that we are still spending time with Jesus, right? We need, like you've mentioned this a number of times, Dr. Rod, today, about wisdom and seeking the Lord and on the right decisions. We need to spend time with the Lord. We need to pursue our purpose. We need to get the work done. We can't just all sit around and have kumbaya moments. We do have to get the work done. We're called as leaders to lead. So we need to lead. We need to be leading from the front. But we also do need to be taking time out, spending time with the Lord. But also, let's keep sight of what is important. Another thing that I think that is a really good important thing let's look at Jesus, from Jesus' perspective as the leader, it's quite often our responsibility as leaders to ensure the people we're leading, our followers, know what their priorities are. Quite often, our followers can get caught up. The people we're leading can get caught up in the wrong things. And I think it's really important for us as leaders to continually remind our team of what the bigger picture is, casting vision of the ultimate purpose so that they don't get caught up into the politics of what's happening in the organization or the gossip or maybe we as leaders made a wrong decision and they get caught up in those things rather than keeping sight on the bigger picture. So let me encourage you as leaders, make sure that we keep sight of the bigger picture and know what's important in that moment. As Dr. Rod said, know what is right in that moment. But also, let's make sure that we are reminding our followers of what the bigger picture is at all times, because it's important. They can get caught up in the doing and lose sight. We see it in ministries all the time that volunteers just get caught up in volunteering and forget to be able to spend time in worship. We see it in organizations that staff get caught up working hard and driving towards a project and burning themselves out rather than looking at the bigger picture of knowing what the organization's driving for and that they need to be, their health needs to be there in the long run and their performance needs to be there in the long run. So we as leaders, what we can learn from this story in Luke as far as leadership from both Jesus and from Mary and Martha is let's keep sight of the bigger picture. Now, today, wrapping up, keep an eye on the bigger picture. Mr. Beast, investing all his time, all of his, to research, investing all of his money back into his biggest picture. Make sure we're investing time and money into our bigger picture. The political conversation about should we lead? Should we allow someone else to lead? Let's keep an eye on the bigger picture and see how we can work together with our teams to achieve that outcome. Business, end one. Let's lead strategically and keep an eye on our bigger picture, rather than just stumbling over our bigger picture in the moment. And obviously, the ministry leaders talking about the Gold Coast City Council and the NAYBA report, making sure that we we understand as ministry leaders, we are part of something much bigger. Keep your eye on the prize of the bigger thing that the greater church is doing in the community. And from biblical leaders, focus on what's right in that moment. Pick what is right and keep an eye on the bigger picture. Hey, I hope that you've been able to learn. Hopefully today you've been inspired to be able to keep your eye on the bigger picture. Maybe you've been inspired to discover the bigger picture. And as we mentioned before, if you're in search of your purpose, click the link below. There's a free leadership development program where we spend the first 10 weeks on helping you discover your purpose so you can focus on your bigger picture. Yes, another shameless plug. But I hope that you've been inspired by what we've shared today. If some of this has challenged your leadership or inspired your leadership, or maybe even has encouraged you in your leadership, we'd love to hear your comments below. And hey, if it's helped you, give us a thumbs up, and we'd be really honored if you would consider subscribing to the channel. Dr. Rod, thank you once again for sharing your wisdom and sharing your time.
As always, it's been a great privilege and good fun as well, Craig. So thanks for having me.
My absolute pleasure. I will see you next week, Dr. Rod, and we'll see you next week. Have a spectacular week, and remember, keep focus on the bigger picture and make sure you learn, live, and lead on purpose.